professor of business at UNCW. He has published hundreds of scholarly articles and 6 books in the realm of economics. He's done this kind of work both on the academic side, but he's also been a public servant in California, in Irvine, and Cary Beach as well here. So he knows this from both sides, both from the private side, the academic side, as well as the public side. So he has a good background in understanding how inputs and outputs and economic issues work in the community. So without further delay, I'll bring you Dr. Craig Galbraith.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate being asked to come here tonight and chat a little bit about economic impact. And as you'll see, my presentation is not going to talk about economic impact, but also talk about the basics of economic development in the context of looking at cement manufacturing here within the New Hanover, the Wilmington region. The starting point of this really is going again back to 2008 when there was actually an impact study, and I use that term fairly loosely, presented to the New Hanover Board of Supervisors, which was very interesting. And I was not there for that particular presentation, but I was there immediately afterwards at the next New Hanover Supervisor meeting. And in this particular impact study, it was suggested that the 160 new jobs proposed by Titan at that particular time would pyramid into about 720 new jobs within New Hanover County. It would bring in an additional $235.7 million of economic activity to the county, and it would result in an additional $19.5 million of rental and dividend income to the county. And this, of course, caught my attention. Again, I've done a lot of economic impact studies. Again, I've been a city council member for a fairly large community out in California. I've been chairman of several different planning commissions. I'm chairman of the planning commission here in Cary Beach, and so I've been very involved in economic development, and I've been a economic development officer as well as certainly at the university doing the most work out there in the field of economic development and technology transfer and some of those type of areas. So it certainly caught my attention, these type of numbers. But what was wrong with the 2008 study? Well, many things, quite frankly. One, it was done, I believe, the day before it was presented. It used only implant. And I'm going to come back and talk about implant because for people that are interested in reading about economic study, and economic studies or economic impact information appear, literally almost every week in the newspaper, where some corporation or the university, New Hanover Medical Center, somebody contracts to try to show how much, how important they are to the economy within a particular community. Not only happens here, but throughout the United States. Again, as a city council member and planning commissioner, particularly in Southern California, during a period of economic growth, we constantly were inundated with economic impact studies by various organizations trying to show how important they were. They all use what is called implant. Implant is kind of a standard computer modeling program that's out there that allows you to do what I would call a fairly basic analysis of economic impact. But you have to use the right assumptions. In this particular study, I do have a copy of the study that was presented. It used the wrong assumptions about the impacts or the ability of the region to provide inputs to Titan. As we will see, one of the major issues in economic impact is that the region may not be able to supply the inputs that are needed by a particular organization, corporation, or whatever, and we need to make sure that we understand the appropriate assumptions that go behind looking at economic impact. I believe it was also performed on the wrong industry. Okay, I believe that particular study was not performed on the manufacturing of cement, but rather on the mixing of cement. And there are a number of reasons for that, which I don't need to go into, but I believe actually it would use the wrong industry for the analysis. It didn't look at any what in economics is called dispersive sort of things, or negative effects. As we will see, a very important part of understanding the economic impact of cement manufacturing or heavy industry in general is that it's not all good. In fact, you can have several negative impacts And sometimes the negative impacts will actually outweigh the positive impacts. And again, in-plan or this particular study did not look at any potential negative impacts related to cement manufacturing. It turned out that this is only a half-page report. Okay? And it was no due diligence, what we call due diligence, to check and see if in fact what was being told to the person who did this was in fact true. You know, were the 160 employees actually fairly accurate? Was the $75,000 average salary proposed by Titan justifiable in terms of some economic data or historical data? And I would argue it simply didn't pass the sniff test. Okay, the sniff test, it doesn't smell right. That there's something wrong with suggesting that 160 employees is going to turn around and create 720 employees, particularly in a relatively small county such as this. That's suggesting that for each employee that is hired, an additional 4.5 or 5 employees are going to be created in some other industries. So anyway, we were asked to look at economic impact, but in the context of several different things. And again, as a person who publishes a lot in economic development, from both the scholarly side as well as being an economic development officer in many Southern California communities, it's my understanding and it's my general feeling that really economic impact analysis is really poorly understood. In fact, I think economic development and understanding how economic development occurs within a community, within a region, within a local economy is not very well understood. I don't think it's very well understood by people that are actually charged with economic development within a particular community. And regional economic development is very different than national economic development. When we talk about national economic development in terms of how the United States needs to grow its gross domestic product, those are different issues than if we talk about a region such as the Wilmington region or the surrounding counties. But the whole idea of economic impact, or really economic development, but particularly economic impact, is based upon the idea that jobs within a region create other jobs within the region. If we have employees, we pay those employees then turn around and buy other local goods, they buy housing within a community, and so that creates jobs, and then those people then create jobs and so forth. And this is what is called the multiplier effect in economics. And the multiplier effect is really the key to understanding economic impact in any type of situation. So if UNCW says they have, some billion-dollar impact on the community, it's based upon the idea that the employees and the purchases of UNCW then ripple through the community and create additional economic impact. And it doesn't create 4 to 5 times an employee, for example, is what we saw in the original study. But it can have a very important effect. That properly analyze cement manufacturing or any sort of economic impact, one, we have to understand the economic structure within a region. And so part of our study is to understand what is the economy really like here. And what's really interesting is I would dare say that it'd be very difficult to find a publicly elected official or even maybe people charged with economic development that even could describe what the economy is like. What are the important economic drivers within this particular community? What are the base economic sectors that drive the other sectors and so forth? But that's a very important part. Now, I've got one slide because we did analyze the economy within the Wilmington area. We have to understand also that not all jobs are created equal when it comes to economic development. In fact, most industry sectors that are out there are a result of the economic system. They don't drive the economic system, but they are the result. They benefit from the economic system. And they do not actually create economic growth. And I'm going to talk about what industry sectors and what type of businesses create economic growth within a community and what sectors don't. And in fact can actually hurt a economic region. And then we have to understand also that the vast majority of economic impact studies, as I mentioned, are primarily
in a place where we also made a huge investment at our seaport to bring in cement. I didn't know if you were going to get to that part at all.
No. I mean, those are all. There's a number of things we could get into that we could talk about. We just don't have enough time. But but the key thing is, I think you're absolutely right in terms of. When you look at the net economic impact, using the 160, we come up with only a net of 110, actually, and that's for the whole MSA area, and we come up with 47 for the county. If we use this 138, which is more than likely, based again about averages, economists have to work with averages, based upon that, that would drop those numbers down even further in terms of the sort of things that we're talking about. Another thing too is, that there's a lot of discussion about that $75,000 average salary. We actually have salary data. Again, looking at the 2009 data, we can look at the average salary data for all cement manufacturing, and we acquired the Florida data to do this because this data is very expensive to buy from the government. So we acquired North Carolina data, we acquired the Florida data. Florida data is a good source because there are several cement manufacturing plants down there. Cement manufacturing does pay well. I mean that's what the data shows. I mean, it shows that it does pay well. It does not pay $75,000. Okay. The way that you do this, you see what sort of premium is paid on above the average salary for a region, because prices are salaries are going to be based upon the average salary within a particular region. If you're in New York, you're likely to make more money as an average salary than perhaps in North Carolina or New Mexico. Based upon the percentage premium paid over the average salary in the communities that these cement manufacturing plants are in Florida, and applying that same percentage to our average salary here within the Wilmington MSA, we come up with a prediction that the average salary would be $63,000, not $75,000. It's still high paying. I mean, it's not minimum wage. On the average, cement manufacturing does pay higher than the average salary in a particular region. But again, we would predict, based upon the Florida example, which is the best example I think out there, that the salaries would be more likely to be $63,000 rather than the announced $75,000. Again, that would drop it down. So, bottom line is the conclusion, and I was told to finish at 7:15, so I'm trying to get right on target here. The conclusion of our study, and again, if anybody wants to read the detail and the numbers, I believe it's back there. We also have some executive summaries. But the bottom line is that Model 3 is what I would hang my hat on, but that's based upon averages. Based upon these four issues right there, lack of fit possibly with the overall vision of what the Cape Fear region could be given its natural amenities and the study by the Federal Reserve Bank. Based upon that the negative externalities of pollution and some other issues are probably greater than the average that was seen for heavy industry in the Georgia study. The fact that more than likely, based upon the averages, that firms hire substantially less than what they announce, and that more than likely, based upon the Florida data, that the average salary, while still good, it would not be $75,000. Even though we can't quantify it, it's my general feeling that the impact is probably lower than even Model 3 and possibly even negative. And so with that, I will leave that. Are there any questions? Yes?
Would you agree that it's important to make the distinction? In the last slide, the first point you had was you mentioned a heavy manufacturing economy as opposed to an economy with heavy manufacturing as a component. I'd say right now we actually do have a good quality of life and a clean economy while having heavy manufacturing being a part of it. We have right along the Cape Fear River, Elementis Chromium, International Paper, ADM, DAC.
Yeah, and certainly GE and DuPont and other places too. I mean and we do have heavy manufacturing. In fact, when you look at again the sectors, the three major sectors that we have here, heavy manufacturing is part of it, but we also are a hospitality. And the question is, as we grow and as you have a vision, can you have those two industry sectors side by side in a relatively small geographic area? I'm not saying we can or can't, but I'm suggesting that should be a point of debate. I think by the leaders within this particular community and the economic development people. Go.
Yeah, just in looking at the models and this whole discussion around not being able to quantify environmental impacts, I would think there'd be, you know, especially as these models develop, and everywhere you go, everything you hear is that our water, clean water, is going to be the defining, limiting factor in potential for economic growth wherever you are. And to me, that's something that could be defined. For instance, in this case, where, you know, this 160 that they projected would be at full production, we know that they have, what, 2, 3, 4 mines, active mines at that time. Predicted drawdown of the water supply can be projected. And you can also project worst-case scenario if we have, from Elementus, the chromium plume, you know, moves into our water supply. We don't have the water available, you know, in this community. That, to me, could be modeled. And
You can certainly model it, and again, I've got a graduate degree in biology, so I understand the modeling process for biological sort of things and chemical sort of things. The problem as an economist is, I agree, all the potential things that you've identified are potentials, okay? The question is, how do you convert that into an economic impact with a defensible, you can say, yes, it will have an economic impact. If you poison our water, no one's going to want to live here, in which case the whole economy might die. You might make that argument. But how are you going to, as an economist, if that has not happened in the past, where you can actually get the data to do that modeling,
I'm just surprised
you know,
you don't have
to
that
be able to
data.
justifiably make that quantifiable, recognize it is an important impact, but being able to quantify it as an economist and lay it out in a report.
And I'm not an economist by any means, but to me, if you have communities like Las Vegas and other places where they've had to quantify this value of water, you know, what does that cost, you know, to the industry and the consumer as it becomes less, that can be built into these models. The other, just real quick one, is going back to the seaport, and in this model in particular, here, you know, with Titan Cement, when they were requesting the $4 million in tax incentives, they actually went to the Secretary of Commerce and asked them to restrict imports into the state from cement from anybody else, you know, from South America, from other states. And that criticality and that surplus of cement being brought in right now versus, you know, their position of wanting to do it here locally, to me, I would thought there'd be some additional quantification around that.
Well, you know, certainly when we look at the economy of the Wilmington MSA, that includes the seaport. Okay, so you know it's built into the economic analysis of you know, of what we're looking at. You know, again, the 2009 data and all that sort of thing. So you know, we're certainly looking at imports. I mean, the economic data includes imports from by sector. So we know what imports are coming in by every single sector. You know, into the port, we know the value and the contribution of the port in terms of employees related to the port activities and everything like that. That's built into the numbers. You know, it's not explicit, but it's built into the numbers because we do have the economy for the Wilmington area. Surprisingly, and you know, again, I know this is surprising, but the port really isn't that important from an economic point of view. Not when you compare it to the tourist market, the leisure market, and that sort of thing. It is important, but it's not as important as perhaps people think. I see it as an important attraction, actually, because I was born and raised in San Diego, and the reason I'm here is because this reminds me of San Diego when I was growing up, and part of that component is actually the advantage of having a port too. So again, port cities do contribute to economic development. Yeah.
Craig, first of all, I mean, the metropolitan statistical area of Wilmington has 370,000 people. That's in 2011, much higher than that one quoted. Importantly, it's more than double in 20 years, and only a handful of the 366 MSAs in the country grew as fast as Wilmington did. Now, if you go back to this notion that we have this very limited economy, or as you defined it, one of the things that sort of fails to address is the fact that a lot of people moved here because of the place location and place independence provided us by technology and the company's willingness to let people be living here, but with high-speed bandwidth in the airport, we could go work for IBM and Microsoft and the big pharmas and just about any field you can imagine. And so this notion of diverse workforce is often missed by people who are measuring